why can't we just read each other's minds? How sweet would that be if we could just read each other's minds? No, probably not. But I found when I was dating, who's now my current wife, but when we were dating, I found the next best thing, and it was this. Her friends. Get her friend, because they talk, and I can get all this insider information. Am I moving too fast, too slow? What does she like? All this good stuff. It's like a gold mine with her friends. Not only that, guys, if you're dating a girl, you want her friends to be on your side because she trusts her friend. You see where I'm going with that. Do you know what mission control is for a Mac computer? It's the Windows version for PC. Now, when Windows came out 20, 25 years ago, whatever it was, this revolutionized our ability to use computers because we can multitask and have all these programs running, and we can seamlessly go between all the different screens. Mission control for a Mac looks a little bit like this. You can have all these programs running simultaneously. You can have all these different desktop and workspaces to kind of move around and work on. This represents somewhat the mind of a woman. All of these different things and programs running at the same time, some past programs, some current programs, some future programs all spinning at the same time. You know that rude checkout lady at the mall from like yesterday? That's still on her mind, or like the budget is tight right now. And that's on her mind, and what the plans are for tomorrow. Those are all happening at the same time. It's like this digital supercomputer with like 16 gigs of RAM and solid state drive. It's just this powerful computer. And this is one of the things that makes a woman so successful. She can multitask so well. Well, if this represents the mind of a woman, what do you think the mind of a guy looks like? The vast openness of outer space, this vacuum of nothingness. If you ask a guy, hey, how are you feeling right now? What are you thinking? And he says nothing, it's probably true. If you ask a girl, hey, how are you feeling right now? What are you thinking? And she says nothing, something's wrong, because she's lying. There's something, she's mad about something. Maybe this is not totally fair about the mind of a guy. Actually, I think a better representation probably looks more like this. One program going on at one time, and he's focused on that one thing, the thing that's right in front of his face. It's not that he doesn't have other programs running. What does he do to them? He minimizes them off of his screen, off of his radar. They're not really on his mind. Just one click, boom, gone until later. For a woman, it's not that easy. From what I've heard and from what I've learned is that it's much harder to minimize the things that she's thinking about or feeling. They're all running at the same time on her radar. So this begins to help us understand the question, or realize when you get blindsided, guys, by a question about something that happened like 2 years ago. What happened is that something had triggered that memory of the past, and it's back up on her screen. And for her, it's as real as when it happened back then. And so we think, guys, why can't she just let go? Freaking move on. Why are you still holding on to that? But for her, it is real, as it's a very real thing. So the key is not to minimize the windows or try and excuse or just ignore the windows, but to close the windows, so that we can help close each other's windows to resolve the issue instead of just trying to move on. Example, if Des and I get in a fight, right, or I say something stupid that hurts her feelings, which I'm trying to do less and less these days, and she gets hurt, and say for example, we're pulling up to a friend's house, I have learned and know now very well that I need to first, before we get out of the car, to reconcile, to apologize. And this just takes a short amount of time. But when I do it, it closes the window. Because for me, I can just click, minimize, come back to it later. Go to the house, no big deal. For her, it's not that way. It's going to be on the forefront of her mind, and I can tell. And so I need to help close out that window. And we, men and women, are different. And that is okay. The problem is that when we're unaware of the differences. Because differences without awareness creates fear of the other. And fear will cause us to not be close and intimate in the ways that we're supposed to be. So we need to rethink our assumptions about the other sex. Our goal this morning is to help each other close out those windows through communication that reaches the heart of the other person. Well, welcome. My name is Jesse, one of the pastors here at Grace. I love this church. So glad you're here. Online campus, what's up? Wherever you're at. Tim, I'm sure you're out there watching. If you need a Bible, raise your hand. The ushers will be coming forward in a moment. And some people just like to have a book in their hand. We're pounding through some serious scripture today. Some of you may have heard that something happened to Tim last week. He was up here preaching during the 11 a.m. service, and this may be too soon, I realize that, but he's okay, so I can joke. He pulled a timber. Is that bad? He was preaching, and he had the flu, and the staff knew he had the flu. He had it all week, and he decided to push through, and he was preaching, and he just passed out up on stage. Paramedics came. He went to the hospital, got a full workup. He got his test results back Friday. I talked to him. The dude is healthy as an ox. His heart is stronger than mine, and he's good. He just got the flu and tried to push through it, and shouldn't have done that. So he will be back next week preaching, and just pray for him. Well, we are going to be learning some communication skills from the master, Jesus. Now, he's the master in two ways. Number one, he's our master. For anyone who has decided to follow Christ, have yielded and have submitted their lives to Jesus, he is the leader of our lives. He calls the shots in our lives. And number two, he is also the master, because he is the master at everyday kind of things like communication, like leadership, like showing us how to walk with our Father in heaven, how to do intimacy and relationships well. And so we're going to learn from the master how to skillfully reach the heart of other people in Mark chapter 5, verse 21. You can open there. Get ready. The first step to communication is to know who it is you're talking to, because we have differences. And it's important to know and respect those differences. We have different genders, we have different personality types, we have different ethnicities and cultures and experiences that play into a heart language that we each need to be spoken to. And so we need to learn how to speak the heart language of people that are different than us. In our text, we're going to encounter two very different people, one man, one woman, coming from two different places in life, who both approach Jesus. And we're going to examine how Jesus communicates to reach their hearts, so that we can learn how to do likewise. So put yourself in this story as we dive in. A great crowd gathered about him, that's Jesus, and he was beside the sea. So picture this, a huge amount of people. And then one came, the ruler of the synagogue, his name is Jairus. This is the first person in this story. What does it mean that he is the ruler of the synagogue? Now remember, this is first century, 2,000 years ago, Middle East, Israel, Hebrew Jewish people. This man, as the ruler of the synagogue, conducted the worship services in the synagogue. He got to choose who read scripture. He got to choose who would pray and who would preach. He was a leader in the religious community. He was the top of the social order. He was respected. People wanted to be like him. He was a model to the community and probably pretty wealthy. And so he approaches Jesus and says, and seeing him, he fell at Jesus' feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death." Now, this is an important man falling at the feet of Jesus because he realized that there is power in Jesus that he has not seen anywhere else. And something is happening that's outside of his control. His daughter is dying, and it's ripping his heart out of his chest. So he comes to Jesus with an ask. He says, "Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And so Jesus went with him, and a great crowd, again, he keeps telling us there's this huge crowd, followed him, and whatever thronged means. Can you imagine a thronging crowd? Whatever that is, about him. This man comes and he asks for help. It's not easy, especially for guys, I believe, to ask for help. About 4 months ago, my wife brought to my attention that we needed some help in our relationship. And I kind of sensed it a little bit, but she was like, "Hey, I think we should go see a marriage counselor." And I call it, we needed a tune-up in our relationship. There was a lot going on in our lives. We were miscommunicating and getting easily frustrated with each other. And I knew that things needed to be better. Or I could have ignored her request and the reality of what was going on and just pretended like everything was fine. And eventually the tune-up would have turned into a whole new motor. So she asked, and after asking a few times, because I'm hard-headed, I had to man up and go and ask for help. And I did, and I set it up, and we went. And it really was healing and helpful for our relationship. This is not easy for us to do, to ask for help. This man comes, and we know that Jesus is a man, whether you follow Christ or not, we can all agree he's a man of compassion. And Jairus is an important dude, so Jesus is like, sure, I'll change my plans. I got my plans for my day. Jesus had plans. But I'll go with you, Jairus, to your house to help your daughter. But then all of a sudden, on the way, the second person shows up. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 stinking years. I want to get to know this woman. I want to really get into her world, this real woman. Number one, she had a discharge of blood. Now, again, Jewish society, these people followed the Old Testament law. And in the Old Testament law, being clean and unclean was a big deal that affected the way you lived your life. The way you could touch and interact with people, the things you can do in public, the places you could go to worship God. It says in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25 through 28, if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, like this woman, all the days of her discharge, she shall continue in her uncleanliness, as in the days of her impurity, and she shall be unclean, according to the Old Testament law. Every bed on which she lies down, all the days of her discharge shall be to her as the bed of her impurity, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, as in the uncleanliness of her menstrual impurity. And whoever touches, not her, but the things that she had touched shall be unclean, and they shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until that evening. But if she is cleansed finally of her uncleanliness, her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall finally be clean. She had to separate herself from the rest of society, from every other form of intimacy. She could not touch another person without making them unclean. She could not sit or lay on something without making it unclean. So you know that if she tries to go out in public, you would be watching her, right? For very good reason, because if you touch or sit on whatever she sits on, you then become unclean and you have to step back. And then having to wait, talk about a little bit of an inconvenience. This woman has been suffering 12 years at the bottom of the socio, and we're going to see economic status. Plus, the physical ailment, the depletion that I've heard, that the exhaustion, and everything that goes along with 12 years of having this condition. And there's more. It says that she had suffered much under many physicians. Now, I don't want to read too much into it, but it does say that she had suffered in ways at the hands of male doctors. And she had spent all the money that she had. She is broken as a joke. It's showing us the severity of her condition and that she would give everything to be healed. And was no better, but rather grew worse and worse and worse. How does that feel to just give everything you have to something that you want so badly? And it just gets worse. How would you feel about God? God is a joke, God has abandoned me, or at least God actually doesn't really fix things. He doesn't really change things in our lives. Really. But she hasn't given up hope. This woman is a hero to many people because she is a fighter and she does not give up hope. It says, she had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garments, for she said, if I touch even his garments, my dreams will come true. She had heard these reports about Jesus, that he can heal and he has power. And not only that, but I think we can read into this that she believes that there's something safe about him. She won't be humiliated or hurt. And so she comes up with this plan. And her plan is to bob and weave through the crowd, right? To get in and out, to get her healing and to move on. Why was this her plan? Because if the crowd would have found out that she had touched all these people, they would all be unclean. And there'd be significant ramifications for her. This is a major risk, her plan. But she does it. And immediately, as soon as she touched it, the flow of blood dried up. And she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Her plan worked. The feeling that she had been waiting for, she felt it in her body. That feeling that she had been longing for, she felt it. She was healed. I love the feeling. I love to surf. So, you know that feeling when your ears are clogged and you finally get it unclogged, popped? Oh, it feels so good, right? You land the plane or whatever, you're like, oh, I can finally hear. I mean, that feeling times a million. That feeling that she had been hoping for had just happened to her. But then Jesus responds in a pretty perplexing and unexpected kind of way. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garment?" Now, there's this parade of people going to Jairus' house, and all of a sudden it stops. And this was not a part of her plan. This is the last thing that she wanted. It says, and his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around on you, Jesus, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?' What a dumb question, Jesus." And he looked around to see who had done it. He stops, he scans the crowd, and he waits. You could probably hear a pin drop. The disciples are like, "Jesus, what a ridiculous question." Now, I want to camp out a little bit on this concept of asking questions. Did you know that Jesus asked around 135 questions throughout the Gospels to other people? Now think about this. If it is true that Jesus is the embodiment of absolute truth, because he is God incarnate, and you don't get much more true than God, and if that's true of who Jesus is, as people who follow Christ believe, why would Jesus ask questions? Doesn't it make sense that the person that is truth gives all the answers and fixes all the problems? Doesn't that make sense? What is, in the work of Christ, what is the purpose of asking questions? I believe it's to create a certain kind of atmosphere. An atmosphere that empowers the other person to have a voice. An atmosphere that allows them to share their perspective without assumption. It brings clarity to the needs and the desires of others. Jesus asked a blind man one time that walked up to him, "Hey, what do you want, blind man?" What do you think he wants, Jesus? Why did he ask that? There's a clarity and to let the desire be known so that we can both be on the same page. If you're following along in your outline, you can fill in the first blank, that asking questions creates an atmosphere of safety. Now, when I get home at the end of the day and I just ask some simple questions to my wife, Des, how's your day? How are you feeling? It empowers her to share. It relieves me of the assumption that she sat on the couch watching 3 kids all day eating bonbons. That's not what she did. She has worked her butt off, probably harder than I did, hanging out with cool people all day long. It takes away I know you. It shows her that I want to know her. I love the image of a harbor, an ocean harbor. Outside of the harbor, there's waves and there's storms and there's all these elements that are unknown, like Jaws. Some people are afraid of sharks. I'm not. Kick it in the face. But inside the harbor, it's designed to create safety for the boat and for the people on the boat. And I love that image for our lives, because whether you're at home or at school as a student or you work or you're retired, there are things that just batter us like those waves every day. Pressures that are put on our lives to meet goals. Temptations that just can overcome us, or pressures that wear on us. And they take a toll. And to create an atmosphere at home, part of what that means of safety means I ask Des questions that helps meet her needs, that helps let her know that she's loved by me and I serve her without needing anything in return. Now, this is difficult at the end of a long day for both of us. Because often I give everything I have to everyone else and give my wife the leftovers. Are you creating a safe space at home, whether your home is roommates or a spouse or your parents or kids or whatever? Are you creating a safe environment at home? Are you, when you get home, do you bring storms and waves? Now, I'll be honest, when I look at Jesus in this moment, it doesn't really feel like he's making a safe environment for her, does it? It feels like what Jesus is doing is calling her out and her worst fears are coming true. But what comes next is not going to be easy, but absolutely necessary. It says, he looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told Jesus the whole truth. Just like Jairus, she fell down in fear and trembling at the feet of Jesus. How long do you think it took for her to share the whole truth? How long do you think it would take you to share your whole story? If you sit down for coffee and you begin to share your whole story, probably would take a little while. But I love how Jesus asks the question and then waits for her. He is waiting for her to share however long it took to share the whole truth. Learning to listen is key, because listening, very often, if you're following along in your outline, is the actual solution to the problem. If your friend or your mom or your wife or your girlfriend brings up a problem, the desire for her to be heard is actually more important than the problem itself. I think answering the problem or fixing the problem is the solution, but actually that's not usually what she wants and needs. Smart listening does not mean fix the problem. But guys, do not hear, okay, that I gotta just turn off my brain. It doesn't mean do nothing. The key is to understand why it is that she's sharing whatever it is that she's sharing. This communicates to a woman louder than almost anything else that she is cared for and loved and valued. She's sharing this thing not so that you can fix it, but that you can understand how she is feeling about something that's really bothering her. Ladies, I want you to understand something. Hey, ladies, this is not easy for guys to do, because guys like to get to the bottom line. We like to sort through all the stuff and cut to the chase and figure out what is really the problem, and we like to fix it and solve the problem. So it's going to take some time. Hopefully you have a guy who's working on it. Guys think, hey, if she's sharing the problem with me, she wants me to solve it. Otherwise, why would she even bring it up, right? I think that. I do. But the solution, which is now off the screen, is to realize that her being able to share something actually does help fix something. We want to fix something. Her being able to share actually helps fix something for her. So 4 quick steps to listening well. Number 1, full attention. Turn off the TV. Look at her. I have found that when I do this, things happen quickly, and I can go back to whatever it is I want to do. So it's not going to take forever usually. Number 2, full mental attention. Again, doesn't mean do nothing, but you got to actually work. Put your thinking cap on. But listen, number 3 is listen for the right thing, which is the feeling. And we got to figure out how to put words to feelings. We got to retrain our focus to focus on the feeling and not the problem itself. And if you're not sure, which I am often, confused, dumbfounded, what do you want from me, Desiree? I will often ask her, do you want me to just listen? Because I can do that. Or do you want me to help solve the problem? Because if there's, something broken in the house, she wants me not to just listen. She wants me to fix it. So it's not always the case. Number 4, acknowledge and affirm the feeling. It can be as simple as, man, I'm so sorry that was disappointing. If that's the feeling that you're getting, that sounds really difficult, really hard. Guys, we feel like if she was just less emotional, her life would be better. She would be happier if she wasn't plagued by all these feelings. And I know I'm generalizing. So if this isn't you, I apologize, kind of. But I've had a recent realization, I really have, that for her, those feelings are real. They're real. And for me to try and excuse or ignore or pretend like they're not important would be to disrespect a real thing going on inside of her. For her to try and pretend like those feelings aren't there would be inauthentic to what's really happening in her heart. Those feelings, what could be right, there are no right or wrong feelings. So thankfully, this is not complicated. We hear the feelings and we sympathize. Even if you disagree with the thought process, you may be like, oh my gosh, you're wrong, or there's something that needs to be fixed. It's not what the need is in that moment. Maybe if you got home and that's shared, maybe later on at the dinner table, you kind of come back around and help fix that problem. So, how does Jesus, after questioning and listening, how does he go about this speaking, this acknowledging and affirming? Back to our passage. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Now, she had already been healed of her physical disease, hadn't she? It had already happened before this whole communication thing happened. But what has now happened? After this whole communication thing has happened, before she was this bleeding woman, dirty, couldn't touch her, unlovable. Now, she is the daughter, not just anyone's daughter, but she is the daughter of Jesus. All these people were crowding around because he is the man. And she had just been recognized as his daughter. He doesn't say that very often, Jesus. She was seen and identified by Jesus and called out. In her, everything had changed, and everybody knew it. Socially, she had just been changed. Emotionally, how she feels about herself just got changed. Physically, spiritually, she could go back into the places of worship. Christ spoke truth and healing beyond just a physical band-aid, because she could have just gotten the touch, the physical healing, and left. But God had more for her. He wanted to go into the deep recesses of her insecurities and speak life and truth to set her free, give her peace. He's speaking truth into insecurities. Now, I don't care how confident of a person you are or pretend you are, we all have insecurities. We all have fears. And the ones closest to us have the power to alleviate those insecurities or to inflame those insecurities. Is your goal to bring security to the people that you love the most? Did you know that when you said, "I do" up on the altar, that is not enough, that one moment? That there is a tape recorder that plays in the mind of a woman, this recording in her heart that asks this question: do you still love me? Do you still think I'm lovely? Do you still prioritize me? Do you still desire me in your heart? Guys, we think she knows I love her. I mean, for crying out loud, 3 months ago on our honeymoon, or on our, engage, or what happens every year? Thank you. I gave her flowers and told her I love her in a card. She should know I love her. For crying out loud, I work my tail off at work to provide security for her, financial security for her. She knows I love her, right? Did you know, and this might be shocking for some of you guys, providing security for a woman means providing emotional security before financial security. And this may be blowing some circuits out there. Most women would endure financial insecurity in order to be closer to you. And if it's not true, homegirl's a gold digger. You should peace out. Water time. But I mean, ask the honest question. Do you think that she would rather have more money over you? A regular paycheck, a home to come home to, and a retirement, that's all fine and that's all important, but not nearly as important as emotional security. And for guys who have no idea what the frick I'm talking about, 2 things. Number 1, she wants to feel close. Not just sharing the same space with each other, but she wants you to give her attention. And this does not mean giving her the leftovers from your day. Number 2 is spend time together. She wants to feel prioritized. She wants to spend time with you. Do you know that according to one study, 89% of women say that when their husband or boyfriend say that she is beautiful, it makes her day. Or at least makes her feel good inside, according to some statistics I was reading. Men, you are the mirror into your wife. More important than the mirror hanging up on the wall, you reflect to her how she feels. And every day we need to reflect to her in words that she is beautiful and loved and cherished by you. And we're all working on this, aren't we? And if we don't, we leave our spouses and those important to us vulnerable to this tape that's playing over and over in her mind, this inner voice. It's like a virus on the Mission Control. It's like a virus. It's like these pop-up screens that come up that you have the power to close out by simple words of affirmation, reflecting that she is still important to you. Close those screens out. And I get it. It's frustrating when she asks, tell me something you love about me today. I'm like, it's awkward. Because I'll do it in an hour when it's not in the moment. But in her head, she knows, hopefully, that we love her. But there's this, her heart longs every day to be reassured. So 2 pointers about reflecting back. Number 1, it's not really about her looks, but about how she feels about herself. And really she wants to feel important and beautiful to you. Number 2 is being sincere. It's not just about the words, but the heart behind the words. And she can tell if you're making it up. So don't make it up. And you may be struggling with this. Maybe you have lost that sense of attraction or desire for your wife. And I want to seriously challenge you to bring that to God and ask God to change that. If it is gone, Christ has the power to make it new. If you're a male or female, he can bring it back. Check this out. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, your daughter is now dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? So while she's sharing this whole story, this thing's happening, Jairus' worst fears come true. And Jairus is probably feeling like this moment is beyond repair. This cannot be fixed, Jesus. But Jesus communicates to his heart. He says, overhearing what they had said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, just believe. Your heart, when you go through pain and having to wait, will respond in 2 different ways. Number 1, you'll get frustrated and angry. You will begin to doubt and anger God, and you will end up running from God. Or you will press in to God. You will press in to the community that God has you. You will press into what is true about God. And you may end up falling down on your knees and crying out to God. Jairus has a choice to make. He's either going to be paralyzed by fear and run, or he's going to believe and take this walk that he doesn't want to take to his house where his daughter is. For the bleeding woman, she had to take a walk she didn't want to take through a crowd to Jesus. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, rise from the dead. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years old. We're going to get back to that in a second. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. Of course they were. We skipped some verses, but they were mourning the loss of their daughter, of their friend. And Jesus, his power is made manifest, revealed, and she rises from the dead. And of course their minds are blown. Is your mind blown that Jesus has that kind of power? How long did the bleeding woman have to wait? 12 years. What's the age of this girl? 12 years. What did Jesus call the bleeding woman? Calls her daughter. Who is this girl, this 12-year-old girl? She's Jairus' daughter. What's going on here is what it's a literary device called a chiasm. What Mark, who wrote this book, is doing is he's sandwiching two stories together. And the reason he's doing that is to drive home a deeper sense of meaning about the point of this passage. They both had to wait, different amount of times, but they both had to wait. They both fell down and had to push in and press in of the challenge that was brought before them. They both had to face off fear. They both came as different people, one low, socioeconomically, one high. And I believe in this passage is a lowering of the mountains and a raising of the valleys, this sense of equality that Jesus is bringing. And I wish I had more time to preach that message, because that's powerful what Jesus. But the point, Jesus says to her, daughter, your what has made you well? Your faith has made you well. He says to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. What Jesus is calling out in both of them in the midst of something that seems like it cannot change, it's out of their control, is faith in the one who has power. They both needed help and responded in faith. Faith takes courage, it takes humility, it takes a teachable heart to press in. And I know that feeling that I don't think this will ever change, or I don't think I can ever change in this situation. But the work of Christ is not just a Band-Aid. I'm not here to teach you some better communication skills about how to ask good questions and how to be a good listener. You could get that on the self-help bookshelf. Jesus is not about giving a Band-Aid to your situation. He's about doing something that's incredibly more radical. He wants to give you his heart, a heart transplant, so that you can do what only God can do through you. You can reach the heart of people and touch their heart. A few ways to respond. You may be becoming aware of the power of Christ, and maybe Jesus is right now blowing your mind, and you have never came to the realization that you want to follow Christ. If you think this is cool, you got to get into the Gospels and see the power that Jesus has. It'll blow your circuits. The coolest moment is when he died on the cross and rose from the dead 3 days later, because it changed everything for humanity. You can ask God for forgiveness, and he will provide grace that will change everything in your life, and you will start walking with God, be born again into the family of God if you want that. Number 2, you may have a relationship that you believe is beyond repair, or you feel like you are beyond repair in that relationship. I want to tell you, if you invite God into that moment, into your life or into the situation, and press in, he can change it. Number 3, maybe you just need a tune-up, and you want to start putting some of these things into practice so you can reach the heart of whoever it is that God has put in your life to love. We're about to pray. And if you identify with any of those 3 things, I want you to, in your own heart, ask God in faith, like the woman, like Jairus, that God would do that in your life. Let's bow our heads and pray.